Well, I thought for a discussion we'd just go through some of the things about the changing face of data centers, and I'm deliberately using that term to not talk about the data center, because there are lots of things at play. In the last discussion, we were talking about big things about networking. Storage is being completely revolutionized from SANs to server SAN to hyper-converged. We've got workloads moving to the public cloud. How much are private data centers shrinking? Yet we're talking Zero Stack. Our previous presentation is all about creating a private cloud OpenStack distribution. What are people's thoughts on the future of the data center? We also talked about cost models earlier, about how on earth do you know if AWS is or isn't cheaper than what you're actually running on a private data center? My concerns are that private data centers companies shouldn't be building data centers. They're hugely expensive. They've got a long a long lifetime. That whole sort of migration. So we're talking about taking storage out of SANs, we're moving it to server SAN and moving it to hyper-converged, building cloud-native applications, and ultimately moving all those applications into the public cloud. Is that the progression that we're seeing, that ultimately we'll land up with those cloud-native apps in the public cloud, or not?
I'll start you off. So I think what we've seen over the last, call it 30 years, is massive increase in complication. So previously people ran their own data center, their own machines sitting in the data center, very, very isolated, didn't sit on an external network. And gradually they've exposed more to the external network, which has introduced all of the issues of security and everything else. They've got the issue of working out where to put workload. Should they do it in their own data center? Should they put some in a colo? Should they put some in the public cloud? And it's all I can see is that things have just got massively more complicated. And somehow we've got to link those all together, make them all secure, work out what's the best place to put things, what's the lowest cost, what's the best place to deploy an app. It's massive. It's just become much more complicated.
Chris, I think the whole paradigm's shifted. Okay, so I think us as consumers want more, and we want it quickly. So just take an analogy of my 8-year-old daughter, for example. Okay, she can go onto an iPad.
She runs a data center.
She does. She's very clever. Watch your space.
Replicated.
And she knows she can go onto the Play Store or the App Store and go and search and find an app and download it and consume it. Okay, she doesn't understand why anything should be different in the outside world. Now, we as consumers basically know we can do the same as well. And we as infrastructure people have inhibited basically and created shadow IT for saying, hey, now you've got to wait 2 months basically for us to enable you to do X, Y, or Z. I'm like, what the hell? Why? Yeah?
Yeah. So time to delivery's changed significantly.
Absolutely, because we expect more.
Yeah.
So is Azure and Amazon solving that complexity because they're taking that all away and their clever scientists are doing it? If that is the case, because Amazon and Azure is stupidly simple to consume, so that all that complexity that we're talking about goes away, why are companies still building private data centers? Why aren't they going all full in on the cloud? Why?
I think, well, part of it, I think, is yes, it's simple in some ways, but if you look at the total cost package, right? If you go into the cloud, you are drastically reducing your operational expenses or your capital expenses. I'm sorry, and that's great, right? And so people that are focused on that think that's wonderful, but conversely, your operational expenses ultimately go through the roof, right?
And become more unpredictable.
Yeah, they become more unpredictable. That you don't know what you're going to spend every month, and they go crazy. And so I actually see a lot of people that have been in the cloud, whether it's Amazon or Azure or wherever, pulling their stuff back out of the cloud and building private data centers because even though they spend more on the capital expense initially, the operational expense is completely predictable and ultimately lower. So the break-even point comes quicker, right? Why do software companies like Microsoft want to go to a licensing model instead of a you bought it once model? Ultimately, they make a lot more money. And so
how do you know if it's cheaper? Because if you've got an existing data center, you go to AWS and you move stuff back, that's a very different cost comparison to say, we tried AWS, it became expensive, let me build my own data center, which is going to take a year, take a fortune, or probably 2 years to build that data center for, say, $1 million. In that time, Amazon has dropped its prices by 30%, which it will continue to do for every year. So how do you even build a long forecast cost model on whether you build a private data center or leverage the ever decreasing prices of public cloud?
I think I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I think it's really difficult to do that, because when you bring the IT inside, there's so much cost that so many people don't figure into the equation, right? And if you don't do that, you can't do an accurate comparison. But to me, when I think about, if I was building a company, the question, it's not so much, is my monthly bill going to be the same? The question is, do I have the kind of model where I need burst, right? If I need burst capacity, and then, where the amount of IT I need changes from month to month, then the cloud makes massive sense, right? Because if I need burst capacity, the only way to do that in a data center is to build the biggest one, even though I only need half of it.
How many applications actually really can truly burst in the first place? So my question would be, well, first of all, it's all about the applications anyway. That's the whole reason people want infrastructure to do stuff with for applications. Most people don't even know what applications even do or how they even talk to each other. Yeah? They've got them on premises because it's simple and they just go, oh, I can talk from this guy here to this guy here. Stuff works. Are the applications, are they even portable to a cloud of some description? How do I get them from point A to point B, and then how do I consume them?
So you've raised, I think, one really important point, and that's historically people have had a certain way of operating.
Yeah.
They've had perhaps siloed teams, they've done their own apps development, they've been used to the idea of physically building a stack that consists of a well-managed server, storage, networking solution that they look after, the classic pets rather than cattle, and they're in that sort of mode of operation, and they would have to change and do a lot of work to move outside of that. Not only that, they're project-based. They sit down and say, I need to build an app for a project that's coming up.
Yep.
With funding associated for
and the
just
funding
a project?
can be tied a lot of the time to a project, so there's a massive amount of business process that people have to go through to change themselves into a cloud consumption model, even if they haven't touched the technology.
Well, here's something too that I was thinking about the other day. Yesterday, I think, during one of the presentations, right? Whether or not AWS or on-prem or whatever is cheaper, more expensive, that aside, right? I think some of the resistance to change, you've seen over time, like, the guys that were doing servers, 10, 12 plus years ago, right? Didn't want to virtualize. The pizza boxes were, no, I can't do that because then I can't touch my, it was all very nebulous and they didn't want to do it. Well, then we kind of got used to that. And, and now you go to this, this sort of cloud model, right, with the cattle instead of pets, and there's a lot of resistance to that. It's like, no, I need my permanent VMs sitting there where I can see them when I can touch them. And why would I, and now I see, going forward a little bit into the future, there's resistance to the idea of containerized applications, right? Which in my mind make perfect sense, because why do I need a whole damn server to run one application? Why don't I just containerize the application? That's all I need. But there's a tremendous amount of resistance to that. And so I think, that's part of the complexity in the private cloud, public cloud equation, right? It's a giant, and I'm not going to say the word, but it's a giant shift in the way we think about what we've always done, right?
So do you think the challenge for companies is to overcome that shift? And we talked about server huggers, and then it's VM huggers, and in the future it's probably going to be container huggers when the next thing comes along.
Sure.
But how do companies then get over that? And should they be getting over that? Where do they stand?
Well, let's talk about the, I'm sorry.
All right, okay.
Friction, I think, is a component that we're missing out of here.
Yeah, and inertia and friction.
Right. So the challenge, moving to, I need a pizza box to I need a VM is a fairly not that tough of a transition. Now, when you're talking about, and from a geek's perspective, if I want to run something like SAP HANA in my data center, that's a pain in the butt. One, the cycles, SAP HANA is self-deprecating like every 3 years. I need a completely new infrastructure. That's like the perfect example for cloud. But now I have to get my application, now I have to be the change within my organization, and I need to push the application owner to figure out how to position each one of these pieces so that it can deal with the latency and actually take advantage of in-memory database hosted on virtual stream. So there's, I think, an inherent, not just technical friction, but a process friction when we talk about moving to the cloud. And I don't know if that's a technical solution to get rid of that friction or if it's something else.
So two of the bits are tied to that, Keith. Number one, who owns that? Who's the owner of that data, and how valuable is it to them?
And how do they benefit by changing their architecture? They benefit by not doing anything.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely
so that's
definitely
the
one
question.
side of
So
things.
they want the feature richness of a platform like SAP HANA. So that means that as a data center operator, I have to implement it, and there's friction for me to roll it out, and there's friction for me to have to upgrade it every 3 years, which is most of us don't upgrade our systems every 3 years. So it presents, challenges on both ends, and it sounds easier just to say, you know what, I'm not going to change.
And how much is there a risk profile to putting the data out in the cloud? Where the risk profile, so when it's in your data center and you're migrating from one set of equipment to another, and you know it and you know what's on there and you've managed it, yes, you can make mistakes, you can do things that go wrong, but I think there's a definite risk that people have. They think, is the cloud really secure? Is it really safe?
Yeah,
And that got brought up.
The fact that might actually be better, that might be safer and more secure than your own data center doesn't matter. It's the perception, I think, that people have of what doesn't matter.
Is there any possible way to quantify that kind of security? Because even talking about, Sonia, what you were saying about internal people being able to hack your environment, what we were talking about in the last discussion, you don't have that issue in the cloud because there aren't any internal person. There's no one who can plug a cable in. If Google or Amazon or something goes down, the biggest, brainiest scientists in the world are going to be fixing that. So there's a shift in security that you lose the control, but the places you're putting that stuff have got far cleverer and more able people to fix when issues happen.
So imagine if it's your data center and your data center goes down, your people are working on getting your stuff back. If it's an enormous data center and the system goes down,
they don't care about you.
There's loads and loads of clients on there. Who are they going to focus on first?
Here's
the ones that
another-
shout the most and the ones that got the more money.
Infrastructure, though, and I think this is the whole thing that corporations need to. It's that fear of letting go of the control of. I can prioritise my staff to look after my stuff and get me back up and running. Whereas the cloud providers are trying to tell people we will focus on getting the systems back up and running because we've got thousands of customers screaming at us that they're down. And no, we don't prioritise one over another because we need to get the infrastructure up, and that's what we will.
Do you think that's really the case, though? Do you think that they don't have prioritisation?
So the question is,
What are we yelling
But
bullshit to?
you're putting a lot of faith in a cloud provider. Let's just take Azure, for example, okay? So Azure got this ability to publish applications to end users using remote app, okay, yeah? Great tech. As a consumer of that, if I'm publishing my applications via it, which are being used by, could be thousands or hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and that service goes down, how do my people work? And I was on an Azure course just recently, and remote app was down for 2 days. Yeah, we couldn't provision stuff, we couldn't use it, we couldn't consume it. Yeah, 2 days times all of your employees for that one particular service. Infrastructure's up, great, happy days. I've got my storage, my service. Yeah, I can't connect to my apps because that mechanism that everyone uses, deployed across the globe for our users, is down. That's what scares me.
Well, and here's two things as well, right? One of the things that, whether you've seen in the news or not, has happened a couple different times where hosting providers, not obviously Amazon, but other hosting providers, have been raided, right? Because there's some criminal activity going on by somebody who has their stuff on some servers in a hosted environment, and the FBI's come in and just grabbed every single server in an entire rack and pulled it out. Because you're hosting VMs, they don't even know what's going on. They just grab all the physical hardware, because that's what they've always done, and it takes down everybody within a sphere. You don't control your data, and that was one of the things somebody actually brought up on here was on the Twitter chat. wasn't that particular point, but some of the resistance comes in with data sovereignty, patents, legislation issues, PCI compliance, HIPAA, government secure networks. Like my last company, we were a DoD subcontractor. We had NRC regulations. We couldn't put a lot of stuff in the cloud. So I think not all of it is resistance for resistance sake to protect my job. I think there are some very valid concerns about the cloud.
Do you think those are things that are, because ultimately that's just software and policy and probably legal things as well, but ultimately I can see them being solved.
Sure.
So coming back around to the beginning where we were talking about the progression from the change in data centers moving all these apps to the cloud, what can we be doing as IT practitioners to create and advance our private data centers to make that transition seamless? So that's what I was thinking with something like hyper-converged. Storage being hugely complicated. Is hyper-converged an on-ramp to that? Is zero-stack an application deployment? Is OpenStack all these kind of things, trying to build your private cloud as to make that seamless on-ramp to the public cloud? Is that what we should be doing or not?
I think that, zero stack and apps like it. Why did everybody go to Amazon? Because it just worked. If IT was that way, we wouldn't have people buying Mosey, right? Mosey went crazy. It's a backup app for those of you that don't, that it went crazy. Everybody bought Mosey, and everybody started doing. And all of a sudden, the network guys had a problem because all these guys were backing up their laptops to some third-party, backup app, right? And the same thing with Amazon. It just worked. If IT worked and was as easy to consume in every fashion that you can decide today that I can decide today that I'm going to do an app and I need a 3 terabyte Oracle Rack server. Boom, boom, boom. There, I'm done. My department gets billed. Tomorrow I go, that was a stupid idea. I delete it and I'm done. If IT was that easy to consume, then we wouldn't have everybody flying up.
So what's stopping IT being that easy
Well, here's
to
the
consume?
challenge. Here, I'll tell you one thing I just thought of when he.
Well, they should be, but they're not.
Well, here's the thing, though, that I just thought of when you said that.
I think they could be.
If you take Dropbox, right? It solves one tiny little problem, right? But guess what? And one service, right? But guess what? They've got an entire staff of really smart people focused on that one problem. Mosey, entire staff of really smart people focused on that one problem. As an IT organization, we can't possibly ever move like that because we don't have really smart people focused on all 200 of our problems inside our environment, right? And so we can never move fast enough to deliver those services.
But we can get professional, we can get private cloud versions of those same kinds of services.
Sure.
We can hire Curtis to do our backups.
Yeah.
Sounds fair.
If you think about what you just said there, so Dropbox, okay? Dropbox has got a business because we can't share data easily internally. Yeah.
Right.
So people share externally, yeah? It's our problem that we've created and we've not been able to give the answer to the business quickly or succinctly enough, so people go like shadow IT, go and consume something else, which is easy.
But Dropbox created more problems for people than just fixing that one thing.
Well, that's what we
because
do,
now you've got data that's sitting outside of the
anything, we move
organisation,
it.
so now you've got exposure to risks with compliance and lots of other things. So the problem IT has is it can't just suddenly give you a Dropbox service and that you get on with it. It has to look at it in terms of all of those other things, consider them, and find a solution that fits all of those as well. And I think that's the problem. Dropbox is easy to implement, but finding a corporate Dropbox that fixes all of the security, remote wipe, credentials, compliance, is hard.
I agree with you, but the thing
And that's why people don't implement them as quickly.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. The thing you realise though is your average Joe doesn't understand that. They just want to share stuff.
No,
yeah?
I agree.
And why are you stopping me sharing stuff?
And IT's got a big job to turn itself around and make itself business available.
Keeping me from my stuff, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Ultimately, IT reports to the business and to the CFO. Yeah. So as a bunch of technical people, we could sit down and solve the world's problems about how a business should structure its corporate IT with some very great minds in terms of how the storage and the networking and all the rest of it should bundle together. But then you have to take that to the CFO to get the sign-off on the budget to do that. And so you have IT departments that have to focus on specific areas one at a time to get something that's going to work within the budget constraints that they're working with, because the business ultimately isn't technical. We are a supportive function of a business enablement. And
I think that's a very good point to finish up on, because we're running out of time.
Just add one bit to that very quickly. And I think that sort of flipped that on its head very slightly. You had said, what can we do? Well, what we can do is to understand the business more.
And that's exactly what I was going to point and saying, as IT becomes more pervasive in the business, and in the future, I don't see IT departments being so separate in the business. IT will be so embedded in in enterprises and companies because IT is just what everybody does. You don't have the department of telephones and fax machines anymore. That kind of thing sort of evolves. So I think very much, Sonia, that link IT more understanding the business and then IT becoming more ubiquitous in the business, that the IT stuff just, in fact, becomes part of the business. You don't have IT supporting marketing. Marketing is just doing its own IT because people are more used to that. So what's interesting, just to wrap up a bit, is that we're talking about the progression to cloud and everything, and there are hurdles, but I wonder how much the hurdles is sort of IT's own making. And these kind of innovative companies that we particularly talk about at Tech Field Day, who are simplifying these kind of things, it's going to be an interesting future to see how all that evolves when networking and storage and data centers become far more simple, and ultimately cloud becomes a consumption model wherever it is.